And meanwhile, preparations are underway for the exchange of Israeli hostages held by Hamas and Palestinian prisoners. As part of the ceasefire, Hamas has until Monday to return all Israeli hostages in exchange for some 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, a majority of whom were captured by Israel during the war. Joining us for some analysis is Aaron David Miller, former State Department Middle East advisor. Aaron, it's great to have you with us. Let's start with President Trump's visit to the Middle East set for tomorrow. What sort of tangibles do you expect we're going to hear coming out of that meeting?
Well, you're a process and train that I think probably is going to work. It's not a peace agreement. There's no guarantee that the war would end in a way that normal humans would regard the end of the conflict between Israel and Hamas. But for the first time in 2 years, we're now entering the third year of this war. Israelis and Palestinians have visited horrific trauma on one another. For the first time in 2 years, you have a possibility of an alternative pathway. I think the first phase of this agreement will be implemented. And it's important to understand that the three reasons the world cares about Gaza, the humanitarian situation, the hostages, and the exponential number of Palestinians killed, all of those elements are addressed in phase one. The hostage situation will be resolved. The Israeli military operations are going to enter a much different and a much more de-escalatory approach. And as that happens, the UN will be able to surge humanitarian assistance into Gaza. So I think I usually default to the negative when it comes to Israeli-Palestinian anything. But I think it's a good start. The question is whether President Trump will be able to continue to demonstrate the will and pressure and focus on this issue that brought us to this point.
So, Aaron, is it different? You know, U.S. President Trump planning to visit tomorrow, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, speaking today at a rally in Tel Aviv against the backdrop of this agreement. Is something changing here permanently, do you think?
Well, there's no. If by permanent you mean that Israelis and Palestinians are on some sort of straight road to a conflict-ending solution, no, the answer is no, 1,000 times no. Too much violence, too much trauma, too much blood spilled in the wake of October 7th, and generational trauma for both Israelis and Palestinians. No, I think that is not in the cards. But as I mentioned, there's an alternative pathway which has been open. The real question in the end, to me, is whether or not you're going to have an Israeli leader, a Palestinian leader, and a leader in Washington willing to make the kinds of decisions that are necessary to build on what could be an end to the war in Gaza and translate that into a broader Israeli-Palestinian and regional peace. We're a long way away from that. But this is as good a start as we've seen in the last several years.
Right. And as you rightly point out, Aaron, you know, it is a big mountain to climb. And of course, there are the governance questions as well. But immediately this weekend, the here and now with the promise of the return of the hostages, what do you anticipate that to look like? And how could we see that play out in the coming day or two?
I mean, it's going to be done without a good deal of public orchestration. That's part of the agreement, particularly on Hamas's part. No more celebrations, no more gunfire, no more parading these people, these poor people in front of the cameras with signs around their neck, basically driving Hamas propaganda. I think it's tricky, in part because of the trauma that these 20 have suffered. We have no idea what kind of condition they're going to be in. The president will be there on Monday. I'm assuming that he'll arrive after the initial hostage exchange. He'll clearly want to meet with the hostages and their families. But again, there's a private, traumatic dimension to this conflict that I think has to be recognized on the Israeli side. And look, as far as the Palestinians are concerned, let's be clear. Even if you deduct the 8 to 10, even 15,000 Hamas fighters that have been killed by the Israelis, understandably, you're dealing with scores of thousands of Palestinian civilians, whole families, kids who have lost not just one parent, but two. This is an extraordinary trauma, and I think that has to be recognized moving forward.
All right, appreciate the context as it relates to this conversation this weekend. Aaron David Miller, former State Department Middle East advisor, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.